A Bajau diver drops past 200 feet on a single breath, wearing nothing but wooden goggles and a belt of weights. He works down there hours a day, most days of his life. The average person lasts 1 to 2 minutes before the body forces them back up, so you assume what everyone assumes. Practice. A lifetime in the water, lungs trained the way an athlete trains anything. Before I tell you what it actually is, do something. Splash cold water on your face. The sink will do. 5 seconds. Your heart slows down. You will feel it happen. That's not you relaxing. That's a reflex switching on, one you never installed and can't control. It's built for water. Remember that it happened. He has the same one. His just isn't idling. Practice isn't what the scans found. What separates that man from you isn't a skill he built. It's an organ, under his ribs, roughly 50% larger than it should be. And the researchers found a way to test whether he earned it. He didn't. This is not a theory. This is population genetics, a peer-reviewed study published in the journal Cell in 2018, led by Melissa Ilardo of the University of Copenhagen, with population geneticist Rasmus Nielsen at Berkeley. Ultrasound scans of the spleen, village by village, with a portable machine. Saliva samples for DNA. A comparison group of non-diving neighbors up the same coast. Related individuals stripped out, so no result could be a family quirk. Measurement, sequencing, comparison, all pointing the same direction. So yes, the Bajau, the sea people of the southern Philippines, of Sabah, of the Indonesian coasts, carry a documented adaptation to the ocean. Science can now name the genes. The practice explanation is incomplete, and the way the researchers tested it is the single strangest thing in this study. There are 2 genes behind this, and one of them doesn't only affect the spleen. It affects the thing you just felt at the sink. One thing up front. The study was done in Indonesia. Whether what it found reaches the Filipino Bajau of Sulu and Tawi-Tawi, nobody has answered yet. By the end, you'll know why that gap exists and what would close it. Here's where we're going. First, the spleen, the body's built-in scuba tank. Then the evidence that it's inherited, not learned. Then the 2 genes. And finally, how far this reaches, and what evolution is still doing to the rest of us. Start with what the working day actually looks like, because the number that matters isn't the record. Bajau divers spend more than 60% of an 8-hour shift underwater. Ilardo's own comparison for that. Nothing else human comes close, and the nearest animal is the sea otter. And the dives themselves are short. One team that timed them with depth recorders found an average dive of about 28 seconds, followed by about 19 seconds at the surface. Over and over, for hours, down, up, down, up. That's the rhythm a body has to survive out there. Not one heroic breath, thousands of ordinary ones. Every human body has a spleen. Most of us never think about it. It sits quietly under the ribs, filtering blood, storing it, doing its work in the background. But think of it for a moment as a tank, a reservoir holding a reserve supply of oxygen-rich red blood cells, ready to be released into circulation the moment the body needs more oxygen than the lungs alone can provide. Here's why anyone thought to look at the spleen in the first place. It wasn't a hunch about humans, it was seals. Deep-diving seals, the Weddell seal in particular, carry spleens far larger than their body size would predict. Ilardo's reasoning was simple. If natural selection had done that to a diving mammal, there was no reason in principle it could not do the same to a diving human. So she went and measured. 59 Bajau in one village, 34 Saluan in another, 25 kilometers apart, the Saluan being a people who live on the same coast but work on land. Same region, same air, similar food, different relationship with the water. The Bajau median spleen came out roughly 50% larger. When a Bajau diver goes under, that oversized spleen contracts, squeezing its stored blood into circulation. Nobody has measured how much that adds for the Bajau. But in Japanese pearl divers, the same contraction was measured lifting blood oxygen by close to 10%. Imagine strapping on a scuba tank you did not know you were born with. No training required to install it. It was already there. This reframes what adaptation even means. It's not that Bajau divers have learned to hold their breath longer through repetition, the way a swimmer builds lung capacity over years of practice. It's that their bodies are built differently, at a structural level, before a single dive ever happens. This isn't a skill. It's anatomy, shaped by generations of a life lived at sea. The problem with that explanation is that nobody had checked the obvious thing yet, and when they finally did, the answer went somewhere else entirely. Here's the detail that changes everything, and it's the reason this study exists at all. The researchers didn't only measure divers, they measured bajau who don't dive, people in the same communities, the same ancestry, who do not spend their working hours in the ocean, and their spleens were the same size, enlarged, just like the divers. Sit with that for a second. If spleen size only came from training, those non-divers should have had ordinary spleens, closer to the saluon. They didn't. And the team went further, to close the obvious hole in a finding like that. Anyone who turned out to be closely related to another participant was stripped out of the analysis before a single number was run. What was left wasn't one large family sharing an unusual trait, it was a population. And the comparison group matters as much as the finding. The Saluan aren't strangers from another climate. They live 25 kilometers away, on the same peninsula, under the same sun, eating from the same markets. Everything about the two peoples is shared except the water, which is exactly the experiment you would design if you could design one, and nobody had to. The coastline ran it for 1,000 years. A trait that shows up whether or not you personally ever use it is not something you build, it's something you're handed. Which means the ocean didn't only change how bajau families live, it changed what gets passed down biologically to a child who may never dive a day in their life. Think of it like a family passing down the key to a door they've never opened. The capability is inherited whether or not anyone uses it. This isn't culture-shaping behavior. It's culture-shaping the human body itself, at the level of what gets written into the next generation. That explains why the trait shows up in people who don't dive. But it doesn't explain what, specifically, in the genome changed to make it possible. Somewhere in bajau DNA is the mechanism responsible, and it turns out to involve not one gene but two, one of them tied to something far stranger than spleen size alone. So the trait is inherited, the evidence supports that much. But inheritance means it has to be written somewhere, in the actual code. It's one thing to say a trait runs in a people, it's another to open the genome and point at the letters responsible. When Alardo's team ran the genetic analysis, they found 25 sites in the genome that differed significantly from both the Saluan and a Han Chinese comparison group. 2 genes came out of that work carrying the signature of natural selection on something the body actually does. The first is called PDE10A. The name means nothing to most people, its function does. PDE10A sits on the pathway that regulates thyroid hormone, and in mice, thyroid hormone is tied to spleen size, directly enough to switch on and off. Remove the thyroid hormone T4 and the spleen shrinks dramatically. Inject it back and the spleen recovers. And 4 years after the Cell paper, Ilardo's team pushed it harder. They switched PDE10A down in mice chemically, the same direction selection pushed it in the bajau. The spleens grew. Confirmed on ultrasound the same way she measured the divers. So this isn't a random mutation sitting near a bigger spleen by coincidence. And here's the part that should stop you. That PDE10A variant isn't unique to the bajau. Ilardo has pointed out that it turns up in Europeans too, where it's been linked to higher than average thyroid hormone levels. Selection didn't invent a new piece of code out there in the water. It took a variant already lying around in the human species and pushed it to the front of the line, because on that coast it decided who came back up with food. The second gene is where the story turns genuinely strange. It's called BDKRB2, and it's tied to that thing at the sink, the mammalian diving reflex. That's the name of what you felt. The moment your face hits cold water, your body responds on its own. Your heart rate slows. Blood vessels in your arms and legs constrict, pulling blood inward, prioritizing your brain and your core over your limbs. It's an old survival mechanism, built into mammals long before humans existed. It's why people sometimes survive far longer than expected face down in cold water. In the bajau, selection appears to have acted on this gene directly, amplifying a reflex that already exists in every human body, including yours, but running it harder. This isn't evolution inventing something new. It's evolution reaching into a mechanism every mammal already carries and turning the intensity up, generation after generation, until a reflex most people barely register became a working survival tool, which collapses the distance between them and you. It's tempting to hear about a population that dives to extraordinary depths and assume they must be built from different material. They aren't. Evolution took a switch that already exists inside you, the one you felt at the sink, and turned it up in the people who needed it most. What nobody mentions about a finding like this is what it costs a body to actually use it. A gene on a page tells you nothing about real depth, real pressure, and real consequences if the biology fails. This is a lot to take in. 2 genes, a hormonal pathway, and a reflex most people have never heard of. I'm putting together a plain language breakdown of every study in this video, what each one measured, what it actually found, and what it still can't tell you. Subscribe and it reaches you when it's ready. Because what comes next is where this stops being numbers on a research page. Bajau divers have been observed descending to around 230 feet on a single breath. That's deeper than most recreational scuba divers are ever certified to go, and they arrive with tanks on their backs. The Bajau arrive on 1 lungful of air. You may also have heard that they can hold a breath for 13 minutes. That number is worth being careful with. It comes from what Alardo heard in the community, not from a stopwatch. Nobody timed it. The depth is documented. The 13 minutes is a memory. Both are remarkable. Only one of them is data, and a story this strong doesn't need the weaker number to carry it. And what is documented isn't a freak performance from a handful of elite athletes chasing a world record. It's ordinary working reality for a population. Men and women whose spleens, whose PDE-10A, whose amplified BDKRB2 were shaped by the generations before them until this became survivable. The extremity isn't the exception to the story, it is the evidence. If that already seems like the edge of what a body can do, the map is stranger than the number. Because this isn't one village, and most of it has never been measured. The Bajau aren't one bay or one fishing village. They live across the Philippines, in Sulu and Tawi-Tawi, across Malaysia, and across Indonesia, spread over a stretch of Southeast Asian Sea that crosses 3 modern national borders. For over 1,000 years they've made their living in the water, not as a hobby, not a seasonal trade. The default condition of daily life. Here's what the study did not do. It did not sample all of that. The spleens measured in cell were measured in one Bajau village on the central Sulawesi coast, in Indonesia, and compared against the Saluan village 25 kilometers along the same shoreline, 59 people and 34. The genome work rested on a smaller sample still, 43 and 33. That is the entire evidentiary base, which means the honest version of this story has an open edge and you should know where it is. The Bajau of Sulu and Tawi-Tawi have not been measured this way, neither have the Bajau of Sabah. Nobody has taken the ultrasound machine to those islands. The adaptation is documented. Whether it sits at the same strength in every Bajau community across those 3 countries, nobody can honestly claim yet. And that gap isn't a weakness in the finding. It's precisely what outside researchers asked for when the paper landed. J. Koji Lum, an anthropologist at Binghamton University who had no part in the study, called the work compelling, then said the obvious next thing. Measure more populations. Marcus Feldman, a population geneticist at Stanford, put the sharper version. With 43 genomes, you can show that a gene variant and a larger spleen travel together in one population. You cannot yet prove that one causes the other, or that either one is the reason these divers can do what they do. Proving that would take thousands of participants, and there may not be thousands of people left on Earth who spend that much of their lives underwater. So this isn't a curiosity from one strange village. It isn't a finished answer either. The sea left a mark on a people's biology. We've measured one place where it landed. That explains how far the evidence reaches. But there's a bigger question underneath it. Whether what happened to the Bajau is unique at all. Whether a body has ever rewritten itself this fast anywhere else on Earth. It has. And the clearest case on record involves one of the same researchers. In 2010, 8 years before the Bajau paper, Rasmus Nielsen led the statistical analysis on a study published in Science that sequenced the protein-coding DNA of 50 ethnic Tibetans living high enough that most visitors get sick just walking around. The strongest signal of selection came from a gene called EPAS1, which governs the body's response to low oxygen. Most of the Tibetan sample carried the adapted variant. Only a small fraction of the Han Chinese sample did. Two populations separated by less than 3,000 years, which isn't deep time. It's a span with written history at both ends. Nielsen called it the fastest genetic change ever observed in humans. And the routes differ. Altitude works through EPO, the hormone that drives red cell production. In the mice carrying the Bajo's version, the extra red cells arrived without it. Same destination, different road. Another population, another switch, turned up by a different kind of pressure, different environment, different gene, same principle. Thin, oxygen-starved air at altitude or crushing pressure at depth. In both cases, a population moved into conditions that should have been brutal for an unadapted body. In both cases, the body didn't just endure it, it changed. This is the piece that reframes everything you've just heard. It's easy to think of evolution as something belonging entirely to the deep past. Fish growing legs, apes standing upright, locked in a museum case. The Bajau and the Tibetans say otherwise. Enlarged spleens, PDE10A, amplified BDKRB2, EPAS1. None of that is frozen in a fossil record. It belongs to living populations, alive today, in communities you could visit this year. And once you understand that a human body can still be rewritten by its environment, a harder question surfaces. If evolution never stopped for the Bajau in the water, it never stopped for the rest of us on land either. Which means somewhere in your own body, right now, there may be a switch, waiting to be understood. So here is what that thing at the sink actually means now that you have the full picture. Go back to that man, 200 feet down, wooden goggles, a belt of lead. The mammalian diving reflex isn't a trait he has and you don't. It's one shared human trait that selection turned up louder in him, and in everyone on that coast, than in almost anyone alive. The slowed heartbeat you felt, the blood pulling inward, that's the same wiring behind BDKRB2, idling at a fraction of its potential. He wasn't handed something foreign. He was handed generations of pressure that pushed a switch you already carry closer to its limit. This isn't about breath holding, or spleen size, or one study in one journal. It's about the fact that being Filipino was never only a matter of language, or food, or where a family's house sits on a map. For the Bajau, identity runs into the genome itself, and the Bajau of Sulu and Tawi-Tawi share that ancestry. Nobody has carried the ultrasound machine to those islands yet. That's the only reason we can't say it. Not because the sea stopped at a border drawn centuries after the biology was already written. Your ancestors didn't just live by the sea. The sea reached into their cells and rewrote what it meant to survive there, and that rewriting is still swimming quietly in the blood of people who have never once left dry land. If this changed how you understand what Filipino can mean at the level of DNA itself, send it to someone who needs to hear it. There's another chapter of this history most people were never taught in school, just as hard to believe. It's already on screen. Go watch it next.